Nathan, wow. I almost didn't recognize you.
It's been a long time, Vanessa.
It certainly has. I heard you disappeared after the divorce.
I stayed busy.
Busy? You always said that. 16-hour workdays, always exhausted, but nobody ever knew what you were actually doing.
Nathan, Grant Mercer. I've heard a lot about you. I'm sure you have. Vanessa says you were the hardest working poor man she'd ever met. And where exactly did all that hard work get you? It brought me here. No. What do you actually do now? I build things. Like what? Communities. Construction? In a way,
I hope business has been good.
it has.
Then tell us, what's the name of your company?
If you're patient, you'll find out soon. So tell us, what do you drive these days? A pickup truck.
You know, I used to wonder whether divorcing you was the hardest decision I'd ever make. Tonight reminded me it wasn't. We can see no one wants you anymore. You should be ashamed of showing your face here. Hard-working poor man.
The sound of shattering glass silenced the entire ballroom. Crystal champagne flutes crashed onto the polished marble floor as hundreds of stunned guests turned toward the entrance. And somewhere near the back, a woman gasped, and someone else whispered, "Oh my God, that's him!" Nathan Calloway stood perfectly still beneath the glittering chandelier, his navy blue suit simple enough to escape attention, yet tailored so flawlessly it seemed effortless, and his expression never changed, not even after the glass exploded at his feet. Across the room, Vanessa Whitmore slowly lowered the microphone from her lips. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then she laughed. Not the nervous laugh of someone surprised, but the cruel laugh of someone who believed destiny had just handed her another chance to remind the world she'd been right about him all along. "Nathan," she called, loud enough for every classmate to hear. "I almost didn't recognize you." The room erupted into scattered chuckles. Nathan offered nothing more than a polite smile. "It's been a long time, Vanessa." "It certainly has," she said, stepping closer, every designer diamond around her neck catching the light. "I heard you disappeared after the divorce." "I kept busy." She looked him up and down, then turned back to the crowd. See, that's exactly how he always answered. He'd work 16-hour days and never tell anyone what he was actually doing. Grant Mercer slipped an arm around Vanessa's waist with the confidence of a man who believed the whole room belonged to him. Old money, the kind that announced itself before he even opened his mouth. His tuxedo worth more than most people in Ashcroft Harbor earned in a year. He extended his hand. "Nathan, Grant, I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure you have," Grant smirked. "Vanessa says you were the hardest working poor man she'd ever met." The laughter grew louder. Nathan simply nodded. "I worked hard." "And where did that get you?" Nathan glanced around the ballroom. "It got me here." Grant laughed so hard, he nearly spilled his drink. "No, seriously, what do you do now?" "I build things." "What things?" "Communities," Grant grinned. "So, construction?" "In a way." His phone vibrated once inside his jacket. He didn't look at it. He already knew what it said. Months of negotiations had ended 5 minutes earlier. His company now officially owned the largest sustainable infrastructure network on the East Coast, a deal worth nearly $700 million. No one in the ballroom knew. No one needed to, not yet. "So tell us," Grant pressed, "what do you drive these days?"
A pickup truck.
"A pickup truck." The room exploded with laughter. Vanessa shook her head. "You never change." "No," Nathan said softly. "I don't." She tilted her head, and her voice took on a theatrical little edge.
You know, I
I used to wonder whether divorcing you was the hardest decision I'd ever make. A pause, timed for effect. Tonight reminded me it wasn't. The room applauded. Nathan just looked at her, and there was no anger in his eyes. Only sadness, because she still believed success only had one face. An elderly voice cut through the laughter. He's exactly the same. Everyone turned. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, their former literature teacher, approached slowly with the aid of a cane, her silver hair framing a warm smile. She stopped in front of Nathan. I'd know those eyes anywhere, and he smiled, genuinely, for the first time all evening. It's good to see you, Mrs. Brooks, she hugged him. I've missed you. So have I. Stepping back, she studied his face. You look tired, he chuckled. I've been busy. You always were, she said, and when Vanessa rolled her eyes and muttered that he was always busy, Mrs. Brooks turned toward her without flinching. And that's why he'll always matter. The room went strangely quiet. Before anyone could say more, the reunion host climbed onto the stage to celebrate the class's achievements, and a giant screen lowered behind her. Photographs from high school began flashing across the room. Football victories, science fairs, prom night, graduation. And then one photograph appeared that made the whole ballroom fall silent. Nathan and Vanessa, barely 22, holding hands, smiling like nothing in the world could ever separate them. Vanessa looked away. Nathan didn't. He remembered that day perfectly. Back when their dreams had been bigger than their bank account. Back when promises still meant forever. If you've ever walked into a room where the people who once wrote you off are the last to know how far you've come, you already understand exactly what's coming. Stay with this one because it only gets bigger from here. And hit subscribe now because tonight is only the beginning of Nathan's story. They had married 2 years before that, on a Saturday in early June, in Vanessa's parents' backyard because neither of them could afford a hall. Nathan had borrowed a suit from his cousin. Vanessa wore her mother's altered wedding dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked that morning herself. There had been no band, only a borrowed speaker playing a playlist Nathan had spent weeks putting together, and when they danced their first dance under a string of second-hand lights, Vanessa had laughed and said she didn't need a honeymoon in Europe. She just needed this. Him. Steady and a little clumsy, holding her like she was the only thing that mattered. Promise me one thing, she'd whispered against his shoulder. Don't ever stop trying, even when it's hard. I promise, he'd said, and he meant it with everything he had. For the first year, that promise was enough to live on. They rented a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, and Nathan liked to joke that the rumble of the dryers through the floor at night was the building's heartbeat. They ate rice and beans 4 nights out of 7 and called it the good life because they were young and in love and certain the world would eventually notice them. Vanessa kept a jar on the kitchen windowsill labeled Someday, where they dropped spare coins toward a vacation they both knew, deep down, was years away. Nathan used to come home from 12-hour shifts and find her asleep with a magazine open to some vacation spread, and he'd sit beside her and imagine, just for a moment, the version of their life where he'd already made it, the one where she never had to wait up hungry, where the jar on the windowsill was finally full. 8 years earlier, rain hammered the windshield of Nathan's aging pickup as he parked outside the tiny apartment he and Vanessa rented after their wedding. His boots were soaked, his hands blistered, and he carried a paper bag holding Vanessa's favorite cheesecake. He'd skipped lunch 3 days straight just to afford it. He quietly let himself in. Van? No answer. The television was on. Dinner sat untouched. He smiled. You waited. Then he saw the suitcase, and the smile disappeared. Vanessa stood near the bedroom, not crying, just exhausted. We need to talk. He already knew. He asked anyway. What's wrong? She looked at him a long moment. I'm tired. I know. No, you don't. I'm tired of wondering whether next month will finally be different. He set the cheesecake on the counter. It will. You've been saying that for 4 years. I'm close. Close to what? The contract, the promotion, the business, the dream? He stepped closer. I can feel it, she laughed quietly. I can't. He reached for her hand. She pulled away, and the silence hurt worse than any shouting could have. I love you, he whispered. I know. Then stay. I can't. We're building a life. No, she said. We're surviving one. He stared at the suitcase. So that's it. Tears finally filled her eyes. I didn't marry failure. He nodded slowly. No, you married potential. And potential doesn't pay bills. He wanted to argue. Instead, he asked the question that would haunt him for years. If I become the man you hoped I'd be, would you come back? She closed her eyes. I don't know. She picked up the suitcase, walked past him, and paused at the door. I hope you find what you're chasing. The door closed. The cheesecake sat untouched on the counter. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the silence was louder than any storm. Nathan sat alone in the dark for a long time, staring at the empty chair across the table, and finally whispered the words no one else would ever hear. I'll build something so meaningful that even this pain won't be wasted. He had no idea those words would become the promise that changed his entire life. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to believe in you the most, take a second right now and subscribe. Stories like this one exist to remind us that today's rejection can quietly become tomorrow's testimony. At 5:14 the next morning, Nathan's phone rang. He hadn't slept. He was still sitting at that same kitchen table when the screen lit up beside the untouched cheesecake, an unfamiliar number flashing twice before he finally answered. Hello? A tense voice came through. Is this Nathan Calloway? My name is David Keller, Operations Director at Westbridge Municipal Engineering. Your former supervisor gave me your number. We have a problem at the Bryan County flood barrier, the kind that could become a disaster. Nathan already knew the project. It protected 6,000 homes, 2 schools, a hospital, and most of the industrial district from the river. How much time do you have? Possibly 48 hours. I can be there in 2. There was a pause. You haven't asked what we're paying. Nathan looked toward the door Vanessa had walked through only hours earlier. I asked how much time you have. By sunrise, he was driving through relentless rain with his tools, a thermos of coffee, and less than $200 to his name, studying flood reports at every stoplight instead of grieving his marriage. Pain, it turned out, had a strange way of sharpening a man. When he arrived, the scene was worse than described. Emergency vehicles, mud-choked access roads, workers shouting over the roar of the river. A section of the retaining structure shifted nearly 4 inches overnight. To most people, 4 inches sounds harmless. To an engineer, it sounds like a warning before death. David Keller met him at the truck, a broad-shouldered man in a soaked yellow jacket. You're Calloway? Where's your team? I don't have one. You came alone? You said 48 hours. David stared at the battered pickup. You understand we've had 6 senior engineers examine this, and they recommended immediate evacuation and demolition. What do you think? I think demolition would bankrupt the county and leave the river exposed for months. Nathan pulled on his gloves. Then let me see it. For 11 hours he crawled beneath the concrete supports, examined corroded joints, questioned every worker who'd touched the project, and refused every offer of lunch or rest. That evening, kneeling beside a drainage channel with mud soaking his sleeves, he pointed to a narrow crack. This barrier wasn't failing because of river pressure. Then why is it shifting? Because someone installed the wrong reinforcement plates beneath the western base, cheaper steel, enough to save someone several $1,000,000, and enough to kill people when the river rises. Inside the command trailer, a gray-haired senior engineer named Roger Mills crossed his arms. We already reviewed those plans. You reviewed what was supposed to be installed, Nathan said, circling 3 points on the blueprint. The barrier is twisting because the western base can't distribute weight. Demolish it now, and the river tears through the exposed foundation before you can rebuild. So what do? David asked. We stabilize it from below. In this weather? With what equipment? Whatever you have. Roger scoffed that it was reckless. Reckless, Nathan said quietly, was signing off on counterfeit steel. The color drained from Roger's face, and when David realized Roger had approved the Western materials, Roger reached for his coat, insisting he wouldn't be accused by some unemployed contractor. David blocked the door. Police arrived 20 minutes later. By midnight, crews were welding temporary braces beneath the barrier in rotating shifts, while pumps redirected pressure away from the weakened base. Every decision a matter of life or death. At 3 a.m, a support beam snapped, the ground shook, and a young worker named Kyle slipped from the platform and slammed against the railing. Nathan lunged and caught the back of his harness before he could fall into the churning channel. Hold on! I can't! Yes, you can. The railing bent under their combined weight as metal tore through Nathan's glove and sliced his palm, but he held on, staring into Kyle's terrified eyes. Don't let me fall. I won't. They pulled Kyle to safety, seconds before the railing broke free and vanished into the river. By dawn, the rain eased. At 6:32, the barrier finally stopped shifting, and the evacuation order was canceled before breakfast. 6,000 people stayed in their homes. The hospital stayed open. The schools were spared. Sitting on the hood of his truck while a medic wrapped his bleeding hand, Nathan listened as David handed him 2 cups of coffee and said, "You saved this county." The crew saved it. No, the crew listened because you knew what you were doing. What are you going to do next? Drive home. I mean with your life. Nathan gave a tired smile. I haven't decided. David handed him a folded document, not an offer of employment, but of partnership. Westbridge was nearly insolvent, buried under lawsuits and debt, but David still controlled a significant share of it. You want me to invest? I want you to rebuild it. With what money? David smiled faintly. I didn't say it was a good offer, but it makes you the kind of man I trust with one. Nathan carried that offer home to an apartment that felt colder without Vanessa, her clothes and photographs gone, except for one that had fallen behind the dresser. The 2 of them outside the courthouse after their wedding, laughing beneath a bright spring sky. No expensive rings, no glamorous reception, just 2 people who believed in each other. He sat on the bedroom floor with it in his hands and let himself grieve for a few minutes. Then he put it away and signed the agreement. The next 18 months were nearly unbearable. He worked construction by day, reviewed accounts by night, slept in the Westbridge office when he couldn't afford gas to drive home, sold his furniture, his television, even his wedding ring after the divorce became final. Some nights he survived on crackers and vending machine coffee. Other nights he ate nothing at all, but every Friday his 3 employees were paid before he took a single cent for himself. When David asked him why, Nathan simply said, "People can't build for you if their children are hungry." The company changed under his hand. He fired dishonest suppliers, opened every contract to independent review, and encouraged junior engineers to challenge senior decisions, building a culture around one rule that became famous inside Westbridge. If the person doing the work sees a problem, the person in the expensive suit listens. Many executives hated him for it. Most of the workers respected him. The first real turning point came from a small town called Maple Crossing, where a landslide had destroyed the only bridge, and larger firms were demanding prices the town couldn't afford. Nathan offered to rebuild it at cost. "We need profit," David argued. "They need a road to their hospital," Nathan said. "We're not a charity." "No, we're a company people should be able to trust." Westbridge finished the bridge in 11 weeks, absorbing what the town couldn't pay, and 6 months later, a state transportation commissioner heard about it and awarded Westbridge 3 major contracts. That was the moment everything changed. One honest project led to another: a school, then a hospital wing, then an airport, then coastal defense systems across 3 states. And within 4 years, Westbridge had become one of the most respected infrastructure companies in the country. Nathan could finally afford anything he wanted. He bought almost nothing. He moved into a modest house near the river, kept the old pickup, wore a plain watch, and every Thursday evening after visiting job sites, he stopped at a small bookstore cafe called the Lantern Room. That was where he met Claire Bennett. The first time she saw him, he was standing at the counter with dried concrete on his sleeve, staring at a handwritten menu like it contained advanced mathematics. "You've been reading the same 4 coffee options for 2 minutes," she said. "I'm considering the consequences." "It's coffee, not marriage." His expression flickered, and she immediately regretted the joke. "I'm sorry," but he only said, "It was accurate," and looked back at the menu. Claire studied him. Tall, dark-haired, quiet, a small scar along his palm, exhaustion behind his eyes. "What do you usually drink?" "Whatever is strongest." "That sounds concerning." "It's been a long day. A foundation refused to cooperate." "I hate when foundations get difficult," she said seriously, and Nathan laughed. A real laugh, the first one he could remember in months. She poured him coffee and slid over a free blueberry muffin. "I can pay." "I know you can. You don't have the nervous look people get right before they check their bank account. You observe strangers closely. I own a bookstore. It's half the job. What's the other half? Stopping people from folding page corners." He sat by the window, and every few minutes she noticed him studying the ceiling, the walls, the support beams. "Are you planning to rob me or renovate me?" she finally asked. "That crack above the window, does it grow when it rains?" Her smile faded. "Yes, about a year now. The landlord says it's cosmetic." "It isn't." He wrote a contractor's number on a napkin. "Tell him Nathan sent you." How much will it cost? Nothing to inspect. And the repair? We'll see. The next morning, a crew found water damage and a weakened support beam that could have collapsed in the next storm, already paid for. When Claire called to protest, Nathan just said it needed to be fixed. That makes it stranger, she said. It's not a gift, he told her. What is it? An investment. In what? Strong coffee. She invited him to dinner, and dinner became a weekly habit. Books, cities, childhood dreams, the strange ways people hide disappointment. Claire never asked about his money, because Nathan never behaved like a wealthy man, and he let the misunderstanding stand, not to deceive her, but because for years he'd watched people change the moment they learned his position. Claire treated his tired eyes like they mattered more than his bank account, and that was worth protecting. One evening, walking the river beneath a cold autumn sky, Claire linked her arm through his. You always look at bridges. I like knowing they connect places that would otherwise stay separate. That sounded suspiciously romantic. It was engineering. It was romance disguised as engineering. They stopped at the railing, the wind lifting a strand of hair across her face, and Nathan gently brushed it aside. You're afraid of something, she said. Everyone is. No, you're afraid of being known. His jaw tightened. She touched his injured palm. You help people before they ask. You disappear the moment a conversation gets personal. Why do you look lonely, even when you're with me? The question landed deeper than she meant it to. I was married, he admitted. She left. Do you still love her? I still remember who I thought she was. That isn't the same thing. No, it isn't. Claire told him about her own broken engagement, a man who loved the agreeable version of her until she became inconvenient. I'm glad, Nathan said. So am I. Their eyes met, and this time he didn't retreat. He kissed her, gently at first, and when she kissed him back, something inside him that had been clenched for years finally let go. Their weekly dinners slowly became something neither of them named out loud at first. Claire started saving him the last blueberry muffin before closing. Nathan started arriving 15 minutes before closing on purpose, then 30, then simply staying until she locked the door and they walked to dinner together. She teased him mercilessly about his plain watches and his 3 identical gray suits. He teased her right back about the towering stack of half-finished novels behind her register, each one marked with a bent corner she swore she'd never allow a customer to make. Once, on a rainy Thursday, he showed up soaked to the bone because he'd given his umbrella to an elderly woman outside the site office, and Claire had laughed so hard she nearly dropped a tray of mugs, then made him sit by the radiator while she dried his jacket with a hand towel, scolding him the entire time for being, in her words, chronically and inconveniently decent. It was such a small moment. It was also the moment Nathan realized he wanted to keep being teased by this particular woman for the rest of his life. None of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street. Vanessa had returned to Ashcroft Harbor 3 weeks earlier, and she'd seen Nathan leaving the bookstore by accident. At first, she barely recognized him. He carried himself differently now, like a man who no longer needed permission to exist. Watching him kiss another woman by the river, something bitter twisted in her chest. Beside her, Grant scrolled his phone. Is that him? Yes. He looks ordinary. She didn't answer, because for the first time in years, she suspected ordinary was the last thing Nathan had become. Grant finally looked up. Are we done staring at your ex-husband? He looks different. Better haircut. That isn't what I mean. Nathan had once carried tension in his shoulders like unpaid bills. The man she'd just watched moved like someone who'd never doubted himself. She'd spent years convincing herself she left because he was weak. Now a harder question pressed in. What if she'd left just before he became strong enough to stop needing her? She thought often, in those quiet weeks after seeing Nathan by the river, about the early days with Grant, the restaurant with the view of the harbor where he'd proposed, the way he'd laughed when she worried about the price of the ring, telling her a woman like her should never think about numbers again. It had felt, at the time, like being rescued. She hadn't understood yet that being rescued and being seen were two entirely different things, and that Grant had simply replaced one kind of hunger in her with another. Not for love, but for the appearance of having arrived somewhere important. The cracks in her own marriage to Grant had been widening for months. He'd told her the resort development was fully funded. The bank said otherwise. He said the beach house mortgage was handled. They were 3 months behind. When she pushed, he called her a frightened housewife, and something in her recognized the shape of an old lie wearing new, expensive clothes. Grant had money and polish and reservations at restaurants Nathan could never have afforded, and for a while that security had felt like love. Standing in his office one evening, gripping a client folder he refused to show her, she understood it had only ever been a performance she was expected to applaud. The reunion invitation arrived 2 days later, Nathan's name and Claire's, both on the guest list. Grant wanted to attend purely for the entertainment of it. Vanessa told him to leave Nathan alone, and when he asked why she cared, she said only that she didn't want drama, though for the first time, she wasn't sure that was true. Across town, Nathan dropped the same invitation into the trash, and Claire fished it back out. "You're going." "No." "You didn't even think about it." "I thought about it 20 years ago." She studied him. "You're afraid that version of you still matters." He looked out over the Westbridge courtyard, 3,000 employees below, and finally admitted she wasn't wrong. "Go without proving anything," she told him. "One night from your past shouldn't have enough power to control your present." He agreed, on the condition that there would be no expensive car, no announcements, no dramatic revelations, and if anyone insulted him, she would do nothing. "That rule is unreasonable," Claire said. "You threatened a customer for folding a first edition novel." "He deserved it," she sighed. "I'll try." That night, on one knee in his mind, if not yet, in fact, Nathan realized he had already decided to let someone protect him for a change. Meanwhile, Grant's world was quietly collapsing. His investment firm had secretly borrowed against client accounts to buy discounted Meridian bonds, gambling that Westbridge would gut the company, spike its stock, and let him cash out before anyone noticed the hole in his books. He had no idea the mysterious, camera-shy chief executive negotiating the Meridian acquisition was the same unemployed contractor he planned to humiliate at a high school reunion. On the night of the reunion, Nathan parked his old pickup beneath the bright lights of the Grand Shore Hotel, and Claire, in a deep blue dress that made him forget every argument he'd rehearsed, teased him for not even washing the truck. "It rained yesterday. That is not washing." Inside, the ballroom buzzed with old classmates and careful silences around anyone's divorce, until a champagne glass hit the floor and every head turned. Claire squeezed his hand. "You can still leave." Nathan looked around the room, then at her. "No, I think I'm exactly where I need to be." Introductions were brittle. Grant needled Nathan about his truck, his vague field work, his refusal to name what he actually built. Claire held her tongue, exactly as promised, even as Grant implied Vanessa had spent years propping up a man chasing failed ideas. A former classmate pulled Claire into conversation, delighted to learn she'd once caught a structural failure 2 inspectors had missed. And Vanessa watched Nathan and Claire share a small, private smile, the kind Nathan used to give her, before disappointment swallowed their marriage, and something in her ached in a way she didn't want to examine. The program began. Photographs flashed on the big screen, careers were toasted, and the host announced that the evening's fundraiser would go toward rebuilding the high school's flooded, condemned science center. $12 million the district didn't have. Nathan already knew about the project. A private foundation connected to him had quietly agreed to fund the entire renovation 6 months earlier on the condition of anonymity. Tonight was only supposed to be a reunion. That plan didn't survive Grant's turn at the microphone. Grant introduced himself as the founder of Mercer Capital Holdings, spoke about ambition and visible success, and let his eyes settle on Nathan at the back of the room. Some of us learned that hard work without vision is simply exhaustion, he said, drawing scattered laughter before announcing a $100,000 pledge toward the science center. And then, smiling, turning the microphone toward Nathan. Since he spent the evening telling everyone he builds communities, perhaps he'd like to match it. The room went silent. Nathan stood, but didn't approach the stage. "That's a generous pledge," he said. "I didn't ask what you thought of mine. I asked whether you'd match it." "No," Grant laughed. "So much for building communities." "A donation should help people," Nathan said evenly, "not entertain a room." "That sounds like something a man says when he can't afford one." Claire started to rise. Nathan touched her wrist, and she sat back down. Dinner resumed under a changed atmosphere. Classmates whispering, some shaking their heads at Nathan, others visibly embarrassed for him, while Grant moved table to table, dropping Westbridge's name and implying Mercer Capital had helped structure its biggest acquisition. Nathan noticed the check Grant had handed. The principal wasn't even dated. A small detail, but he'd learned that dishonest men often reveal themselves in small details. A woman in a black dress approached his table. Jillian Cross, a former classmate turned financial journalist. Years earlier, Nathan had helped save her brother's life at Bryan County. Tonight, she'd come to warn him. "I've been tracing irregular transfers connected to Meridian bonds," she said quietly. "Several accounts lead back to Grant. Client money may have been moved without authorization." "How serious?" "Serious enough to ask questions. One of his accountants is delivering documents tonight. He's afraid Grant plans to leave the country after the reunion." Nathan looked across the room to where Grant was laughing beside a distracted Vanessa. "Does she know?" "I don't think so." Grant's phone lit up mid-conversation. His face changed, and he hurried into the hallway. Nathan followed. Claire wanted to come. He asked her to stay with Vanessa instead. "She may need someone she trusts." "She barely knows me. She came to your bookstore 3 nights ago." Claire's eyes widened. She hadn't told him that. "I trusted you," Nathan said simply, and went after Grant alone. In the hallway, Grant was hissing into his phone about destroyed records. He hung up the moment he saw Nathan. "Trouble?" "Private business." It sounded urgent. Grant's temper flared. The cheap suit, the bookstore clerk on his arm, the audacity to judge him. And Nathan let it all pass until Grant jabbed a finger into his chest and sneered that Nathan had lost Vanessa because he couldn't provide for her. "Remove it," Nathan said quietly. Grant laughed and asked what exactly he thought he'd do. "You don't want to find out." Something in his voice made Grant step back. The emergency exit opened. Leonard Pike, Grant's accountant, walked in gripping a brown envelope, sweat on his forehead. "I'm ending this," he said. Grant lunged for the envelope. Nathan stepped between them. "He owns Westbridge," Leonard blurted, and the hallway went silent. Grant turned slowly. "What?" "He's Nathan Calloway, founder and majority owner of Westbridge Civic Group." Grant laughed once, weakly, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You work construction. You drive a pickup." "I do." "You expect me to believe you control Westbridge?" "I don't expect anything from you." Leonard held out the envelope. "These are copies of every unauthorized transfer, every forged approval. You signed these." "So did you," Grant snapped, before two federal investigators stepped through the ballroom doors behind Jillian. Grant bolted back into the ballroom, shouting Vanessa's name in front of everyone. "You knew about this." "Knew about what?" "The records. You went through my office." "I tried," she admitted, and a gasp rippled through the crowd. Grant seized the stage microphone. "This man has been lying to all of you. He is not a construction worker. He owns Westbridge, the company buying Meridian for nearly $700 million. Silence, then a wave of stunned whispers, every face turning toward Nathan. Vanessa looked like the floor had dropped from beneath her. "Did you steal from your clients?" she asked Grant, her voice breaking. "I was going to replace it." "Did you use my name?" His hesitation was the only answer she needed, and she slapped him, the sound cracking across the ballroom. "You used my accounts. You enjoyed everything the money bought. I thought it was yours." The investigators took his arms. He looked back once at Nathan. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," Nathan said quietly. "Then why are you standing there like you won?" "I'm not here to win." The doors closed behind Grant, and no one spoke for a long moment. The principal, shaken, walked to the microphone and announced what Nathan had spent 6 months trying to keep quiet. That an anonymous foundation had already funded the complete $12 million reconstruction of the Science Center, along with scholarships for low-income students and 10 years of maintenance, and that the donor had specifically asked never to be named. Applause started near the back of the room and rolled forward until the whole ballroom was on its feet, and Nathan, mortified, leaned toward Claire. "This is exactly what I wanted to avoid." "You'll survive," she smiled. Mrs. Brooks made her way to him with her cane. "I knew you would build something. You taught me too." "No, I only taught you to recognize the value that was already there." Across the room, Vanessa watched with tears sliding silently down her face, and for a moment neither of them was in the ballroom at all. They were back in that small apartment, beside the untouched cheesecake and the suitcase by the door. She came to him slowly. She thanked Claire first, quietly, and Claire understood exactly what she meant. Then she turned to Nathan. "I was wrong. Don't make this easier for me. I mocked your dreams because I was afraid they'd never include the life I wanted. I thought money would make me feel safe, that a man who looked successful could never disappoint me." She glanced toward the doors Grant had been led through. "I was wrong about that too." She looked at him and at Claire both. "You asked me once if you became the man I wanted, would I come back? I need you to know, you became better than the man I wanted. You became the man I wasn't ready to understand. I don't want you back. I only want you to know I'm sorry." Nathan stepped forward and held her while she cried, not with regret alone, but with release. "I forgive you," he said. I'm trying to forgive myself. You will. How can you be sure? Because rebuilding is what people do after something collapses. She laughed through her tears. You always turn everything into engineering. Bad habit. It really is, Claire agreed, joining them, and for the first time all night, Vanessa's smile was real. If this is the part where you feel the whole room exhale with you, that's exactly the point. Drop a comment telling me whether Nathan should have said even less, because it's about to get a lot softer from here. Near midnight, Nathan and Claire slipped out through a side entrance into soft rain over Ashcroft Harbor. You handled that well, Claire said. I spent most of it wishing the floor would open. You exposed a criminal, funded a school, and forgave your ex-wife. You attended a reunion. He laughed despite himself, and under the hotel awning, he finally admitted he should have told her about Westbridge sooner, that he'd been afraid money would change how she saw him. It didn't, she said. You're not angry? I'm annoyed. You let me think you managed construction. I do manage construction. You own companies. They involve construction. She tried not to smile. You are impossible. He took her hands. I spent years believing love meant proving my value. With Vanessa, I thought success would make me worthy of being chosen. With you, I learned I should never have needed to earn basic love. Her eyes filled, and Nathan lowered himself onto one knee right there beside the truck. You are not doing this next to your dirty truck. I washed it. It rained. That counts. He pulled a small ring box from his jacket. I've had this 3 months, waiting for the right moment. This isn't it, but you taught me that waiting for perfect moments can make you miss the honest ones. He looked up at her. You saw me when I was trying not to be seen. You loved my tired days, my silence, my terrible suits, my habit of inspecting every ceiling I walk under. I have built roads and bridges and schools and companies, and none of them feel like home without you. Will you marry me? She said yes before he even finished the sentence, and when he slipped the ring onto her hand and kissed her in the rain, strangers leaving the hotel stopped to cheer, and for once in his life, Nathan didn't care who was watching. 8 months later, Nathan and Claire were married inside the completed Maple Crossing Community Center. No cameras, no business press, just family, employees, teachers, scholarship kids, and the people whose towns Westbridge had helped rebuild. David Keller stood as best man. Mrs. Brooks sat in the front row. Vanessa came alone. Cleared of any wrongdoing after Grant's arrest, she'd lost nearly everything tied to his fraudulent accounts and moved into a small apartment, taking a job helping women rebuild their finances after controlling relationships. It wasn't the glamorous life she'd once imagined. It was honest, and for the first time, it was entirely hers. Grant pleaded guilty to fraud, theft, forgery, and obstruction, and his assets were seized to repay the very clients he'd stolen from. The man who measured success by what others could see finally lost everything he'd built for display. Nathan never once visited him in prison. He didn't need revenge. The truth had already done its work. At the reception, Vanessa told Claire she looked beautiful, watched Nathan across the room helping a child fix a broken toy, and admitted she was happier than she'd seen him in years. So do you, Claire said. I'm getting there, Vanessa answered, and Claire told her that counted for something. Later, as the sun set over Maple Crossing and music drifted through the open doors, Claire rested her head on Nathan's shoulder. Do you regret going to the reunion? No. Even after everything? It reminded me that closure doesn't come when people finally understand your worth. It comes when you no longer need them to. She smiled. That sounded romantic. It was engineering, he said, and she laughed. Sometimes late at night, Nathan still thought about the version of himself who'd sat alone at that kitchen table with a cold cheesecake and an empty chair across from him. He didn't resent that man anymore. He understood him. That man hadn't known yet that the promise he whispered into the dark, to build something so meaningful the pain wouldn't be wasted, would eventually become the quiet architecture of an entire life. A company that treated its workers like people, a bridge that saved a town, a barrier that kept a hospital standing, a science lab full of kids who'd never know his name, and a woman across the breakfast table who loved him exactly as tired and imperfect as he was. For years, Nathan had carried Vanessa's leaving as proof he'd failed. Now he understood some endings aren't punishments. They're foundations. The divorce had broken the life he thought he needed. The years afterward had taught him how to build one that was honest. He hadn't become successful to shame the woman who left him. He'd become successful because pain forced him to decide what kind of man he'd be when no one was watching. And he'd chosen integrity, patience, and the quiet discipline of building. Long after the applause finally came, he never needed it. Some people will mock you while you're still laying the foundation. They'll laugh because they can't see the finished structure yet. They'll mistake your silence for weakness and your patience for failure. Let them. You don't owe anyone an explanation of your potential while you're still building it. The strongest victories aren't the ones that leave your enemies humiliated. They're the ones that leave your own heart free. If Nathan's story moved you, hit like right now. Subscribe for more stories of love, betrayal, and unforgettable justice. And tell me in the comments, was his forgiveness the real victory, or should he have walked away without saying a word? Until the next story, remember this: your value doesn't shrink just because someone failed to see it. Sometimes rejection isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's the exact moment your real life finally begins.